This is a world of great struggle. A small step, starting at the end, step by step, slowly rises. Until conquering the world, tidying up rivers and mountains, and conquering 9 kingdoms, the feudal lords perished. Keywords of the novel. Conquering the world without pop-ups, conquering the world. Download the complete collection of TXT, and read the latest chapters of Conquering the World. Chapter 1. Battlefield. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1 Battlefield. This battle is more ominous than good. Yeah, the Ghost Army is fierce and bloodthirsty. After breaking the city, they are all male slaves and female prostitutes. Loud discussions came from beside his ears, and Xiao Yuan struggled to open his eyes. His mind was a bit drowsy, and he began to look around at the environment in a daze. This is a plain, surrounded by many people wearing the armor of ancient soldiers, holding long halberds in their hands, lying under a tree to rest, chatting in pairs and threes. He lowered his head and looked down. He was the same, wearing armor all over. What about his casual wear? His brain was a bit short-circuited. He was about to ask the nearest person a question, but just then, suddenly a scream of surprise came from ahead. Enemy attack! Enemy attack! The frightened cry caused all the soldiers to stop talking, suddenly stood up, grabbed their long halberds, and began to rush forward in a hurry. Encounter the enemy! Encounter the enemy! Hurry up! The Ghost Army is all here. What are you still doing here? Someone began to pull up Xiao Yuan in a daze. He didn't react at all, he just stared and was pulled forward by the soldier running. Everywhere was the sound of infantry marching, and everywhere was the sound of armor rubbing against each other. Before long, the army gathered. On the vast plain, there was a situation of military confrontation between the two sides. On Xiao Yuan's side, long halberds stood tall and flags fluttered in the wind, making him one of all the soldiers. He didn't know what he was doing, instinctively wanting to run, but around him were soldiers dressed the same as him, and everyone was on standby, as if waiting for some command. Some people have raging anger in their eyes, while others have a strong fear in their eyes. As he looked around and was at a loss, an order was issued from the army, and a general drew out his sword. Archer. With the military order, the front row soldiers on Xiao Yuan's side raised their bows and arrows, pulling them full and pointing diagonally towards the sky. Release. With a command, 10,000 arrows shot out in unison, and with a buzzing sound, Xiao Yuan's eyes widened instantly. Because he saw clearly, there seemed to be a black cloud sweeping up from his own camp, densely packed with black dots gathering together, drawing an arc in mid-air and pouring down. Pup p p p p. Arrows slanted across the ground, and many people in the front row of the enemy's army were shot to the ground, with screams of agony echoing one after another. This is too shocking. It's too real. Realistic enough to make his nerves tense instantly. Dong! Dong! Dong, dong, dong. The stirring sound of war drums rang out, and a general rode a high-headed horse and began to point his sword forward. He exclaimed in shock, "Kill!" In an instant, all the soldiers let out a loud shout, picked up their long spears, and began charging forward crazily. Xiao Yuan's front, back, left, and right were all like this. He was in a crowd and had no choice but to pick up his weapons. With the crowd, if he didn't charge, he would be tripped by countless soldiers behind him, and then trampled to death by thousands of soldiers and horses. This side launched a full army charge, and the other side did the same. During the charge, the enemy's front row rode horses and began throwing spears on the horses. Spears, hanging in the strong wind, pierced through the stomachs of many soldiers. A series of screams echoed in my ears, and the person next to me was stabbed by a long spear and flew backwards, spitting blood out of his mouth, and his life instantly passed away. What the hell is this place? There was no time for Xiao Yuan to explore, and in order to survive, he had to endure this ancient cold weapon war. The armies of both sides will soon meet, and blood will immediately splash on the spot. Like meat grinders, in places of confrontation, blood flows like a river, and soldiers are like cutting wheat, falling down in batches. Enemy cavalry, ravaging the plains, often able to bring down a large area upon contact. This is an encounter battle, and our vanguard troops have encountered the enemy's main force on this plain. The forces on both sides were not proportional, and the formation was quickly disrupted. Xiao Yuan's side was gradually surrounded by the enemy. In his past life, he was a top-notch expert who scared countless people in the industry. He was skilled in killing people and also killed many enemy leaders. However, the current scene has truly shocked him. The blood under his feet and the screams around him were all stimulating his nerves. Several curved swords struck head-on, and the enemy soldiers dressed in exotic attire, with blonde hair and blue eyes, were fierce and bloodthirsty. With a chill in his heart, Xiao Yuan immediately lifted his long halberd horizontally. With the sound of a clash of gold and iron, he shook his arms and bounced off several curved swords. At the same time, with a sweep of the long halberd, he instantly killed several people. At this moment, his fighting spirit was also stimulated, because it was obvious that his companions dressed the same as him, had Chinese faces, while the enemy troops were all of different races. Another thing is that he, who has been wandering on the brink of life and death all year round, has already realized very clearly that this is the battlefield. He doesn't kill the enemy won't be weak. Kill. His face also splattered with some blood, holding a long spear, and frantically rushed into the enemy camp. The war was still ongoing, and I don't know how long it lasted. In the end, the cries of killing around him had gradually disappeared, and the sun was setting in the west. Xiao Yuan was soaked in blood all over. He stood in the center and looked around, surrounded by enemy forces from different ethnic groups in all directions. He had already been surrounded by 3 layers inside and 3 layers outside. Not long after, a foreign general with the appearance of a war horse rode apart from the crowd. He held a whip and stood on the horse, pointing at Xiao Yuan, and asked coldly, "Who are you? You have such martial arts skills, report your name." He chattered away something, and Xiao Yuan couldn't understand it at all. However, seeing him, Xiao Yuan's spirit shook. No need to ask, he must be the leader of the other party. Without a word, he let out a roar and rushed forward with his halberd. But the enemy soldiers couldn't let him succeed. Strange screams arose everywhere, and countless people immediately protected the leader and fought with Xiao Yuan again. Countless curved swords attacked from all directions, and Xiao Yuan's eyes widened in anger. He began to chop and sweep left and right, and corpses flew out one by one. The screams of agony echoed one after another, and the leader's eyes also showed a look of fear. At this point in the battle, Xiao Yuan was actually exhausted, relying entirely on one breath to support himself, but he couldn't die. At this moment, his head happened to experience severe pain. Message after message rushed into my mind, exploding like a bomb. After repelling the enemy in front of him with one halberd, he couldn't help but stumble back a few steps and then knelt on one knee with a long halberd. At the same time, soldiers from different ethnic groups gathered around and marched forward. A dizziness struck, and after an unknown amount of time, he felt lifted up. He struggled to open his eyes, only to see the brutal traces of the battlefield. Everywhere, soldiers dressed the same as him collapsed in a pool of blood, with carved feathers scattered all over the ground, long halberds scattered, flags broken, and bloodstains stuck on the ground, fluttering in the wind. Has our army been completely destroyed? The Central Plains Empire. He closed his eyes again. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Survival. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Survival. When he opened his eyes again, Xiao Yuan was already in the kind of dungeon in ancient times. The prison door was made of rough wood, and he was wearing thick iron chains on his hands and feet. Subconsciously, he shook his arm and the iron chain made a loud noise. It was obvious that it could not be broken by human labor alone. In the prison, there were several other prisoners. When Xiao Yuan woke up, they all looked at him with malicious eyes. One of them looked at the armor on Xiao Yuan's body and asked in a voice, "Soldiers?" Xiao Yuan didn't speak and glanced roughly. There were 3 people in front of him, all looking very disheveled. They were all dressed in coarse clothes and linen, and they were probably Central Plains men who had been arrested. But seeing him ignore, the person no longer said much, but sat on the ground, with his back against the wall, and closed his eyes to raise his spirits. Xiao Yuan also sat up cross-legged and began to carefully recall the causes and consequences. The brutality of the cold weapon battlefield is still vividly remembered. I am clearly a modern person, how could I appear here? After closing his eyes, he quickly found these answers in his mind. He should have fused with the soul of an ancient soldier, with the same name and surname. With all the knowledge of that soldier, he knew about the current world and his own situation. Although also known as Huaxiao, this place does not belong to any historical era, and its power distribution is somewhat similar to the feudal system of the Zhou dynasty, with the emperor above and the feudal lords below, all of whom obey the emperor's orders. And this time the ghost tribe invaded the border. The army where Xiao Yuan was stationed was coming to resist the foreign tribes, but the vanguard troops encountered the main force of the ghost army and suffered a great defeat in the plain. Now, his identity is an ordinary soldier who has been captured by the ghost tribe. Other things, don't think too much for now. The most important thing right now is how to escape and how to survive in this world. While he was tidying up his thoughts, the sound of an open door came from the dungeon gate. Soon, a ghost soldier walked over with steps. Upon hearing the commotion, including Xiao Yuan, several people in the prison opened their eyes. The ghost soldier stood in front of the prison door, looked at several people and sneered, then took out a mantu and threw it into the cell, then turned around and left directly. Xiao Yuan has not eaten for at least 2 or 3 days, and the other 3 are no better than him. Eating is a human instinct. In extreme hunger, appetite can overpower everything. Xiao Yuan has experienced this situation before when performing a certain task and has a profound understanding of it. At this moment, the mantu was so immortal that it was thrown in front of him. The other 3 were looking at him with dim eyes. Looking down at the mantu on the ground, and looking up at the 3 people in front of him, Xiao Yuan squinted slightly, and then without saying a word, kicked the mantu out. Mantu was kicked at the foot of a man, and the man saw that, without saying anything, he jumped on it like a hungry dog, grabbed the mantu on the ground, and tried to put it into his mouth. The other 2, unwilling to accept the situation, immediately rushed over, and the 3 of them immediately twisted into a ball. Mine. This is mine. The 3 men fought frantically. How could they divide one mantu from 3 hungry people? It was obvious that the soldiers of the ghost family had a sinister intention. Soon, the man who first came into contact with mantu was pressed on the ground by the other 2, and was strangled from behind. He began to struggle desperately, but with his own strength, he was no match for the 2 of them. Before long, he lost his resistance and was strangled alive on the spot. This is too cruel. But this is the reality. There is only one mantu. If you don't grab it, you will starve to death. Xiao Yuan watched coldly. At this moment, in order to survive, the last 2 people also fought together. In the process of fighting with each other, neither of them could do anything. One of them began to shout. "Help me kill him. I will share half of the mantu with you." He clearly said this to Xiao Yuan, and upon hearing it, another person immediately exclaimed, "Kill him. I'll give you half of it." Hearing their cries, Xiao Yuan first looked at the mantu not far away, and then walked silently past. "Hurry up. Kill him." Seeing him coming over, one person immediately started shouting and stared at Xiao Yuan with sharp eyes. The person originally thought that this soldier was a coward who would be intimidated by his own ferocity and obey his orders, but Xiao Yuan didn't say a word and grabbed the heads of the two and collided fiercely. A muffled groan came, and the two of them suddenly passed out. Xiao Yuan picked up the mantu on the ground, patted the dust on it, and ate it without hesitation. Although a mantu could not completely fill his stomach, Xiao Yuan felt more or less refreshed after eating it. At this moment, the soldier of the ghost clan went back and forth. After he came over, he first looked at the three men who were already lying on the ground, dying and fainting. Then he turned his gaze to Xiao Yuan and shouted coldly, "You! Come out!" Xiao Yuan couldn't understand what he was talking about, but seeing that he didn't move, the ghost soldier took out the key, opened the prison door, and waved fiercely at him. This action, even a fool could tell what it meant. Xiao Yuan had no choice but to silently walk out, while silently glancing at the soldier's curved sword at his waist. With all his abilities, even though his hands and feet are bound by iron chains, it is not difficult to kill this ghost soldier. However, the key issue is that he has no idea what the situation is outside. If he takes action now, although he can kill this person, he is afraid that his fate will also be a dead end. No, we can't be impulsive. We need to take a long-term approach and figure out the current situation before making a decision. He let out a secret message in his heart and became relatively calm. At this moment, seeing him come out, the soldier also gave him a hard push from behind and continued to shout, "Let's go." Xiao Yuan was pushed by him and stumbled, silently walking ahead while also observing the environment inside the entire dungeon. This dungeon has many cells, each containing a man from the Central Plains. When Xiao Yuan was pushed out by soldiers, many people stood by the cell door and watched, with soldiers guarding the passage every few steps. Not long after, Xiao Yuan was pushed out of the dungeon and suddenly saw the sky. Under the dazzling sunlight, he couldn't help but lift his hand to block it. After adjusting to his gaze, he also noticed soldiers guarding the entrance of the prison, and outside there were 3 steps and 1 post, 5 steps and 1 sentry, with soldiers patrolling back and forth. Fortunately, I didn't act rashly just now, otherwise my hands and feet would have been bound and I wouldn't have been able to escape from here. He began to intentionally jot down the patterns and times of the patrol soldiers, but unfortunately, the ghost army that was escorting him had already pushed him back and shouted, "Let's go." Xiao Yuan had no choice but to accept the facts in order to survive in this situation. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Life and Death Fighting. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Life and Death Fighting. Quickly, he was taken onto the street, and as far as his eyes could see, the people coming and going in the market were all from the ghost tribe, and there were also Central Plains men like him who were bound by thick iron chains and escorted onto the streets. This is obviously the territory of the ghost tribe. With the power of one person and the situation of hands and feet being bound, it's too difficult to escape. He must develop a comprehensive plan, and there is only one opportunity. Failure is death, and he must not be impatient. He began to carefully examine the surroundings. Take notes of streets, buildings, routes, soldier patrols, and so on in your mind. Not long after, under the push and shoving of the soldiers, Xiao Yuan was taken to a place. This is an arena, with a huge cage in the center and countless ghost spectators surrounding it. After chatting with the soldiers and the gatekeeper, Xiao Yuan was brought in, but at this moment, it was not his turn to play. The huge cage was opened, and 2 Central Plains men with iron chains on their hands and feet were pushed into the cage. Then, the iron door was slammed shut. The audience of the ghost tribe above began to make strange noises, as if cheering for something. Xiao Yuan began to observe the surrounding environment calmly. There are many ghost soldiers responsible for guarding here, even more heavily guarded than in the dungeon. At this moment, 2 Central Plains men in the cage began to fight helplessly. The 2 of them entangled with each other, similar to a fight. After a while, the winner had already been decided, and the dominant person grabbed the other person, but did not give up. Instead, after winning, they extended their right hand to pull the other up. "Are you okay?" said the victorious man from the Central Plains. "It's okay, thank you for being kind." The other person clasped their fists. As soon as the two of them finished speaking, the soldiers of the ghost tribe guarding around the cage rushed over. Without saying a word, they took out their spears and stabbed the two directly through the iron fence, killing them on the spot. At the same time, he was cursing and saying something. Seeing this, Xiao Yuan's eyes stiffened and he immediately understood. He clenched his fist fiercely. At the same time, he was also pushed forward by the soldiers behind him, saying, "It's your turn." Under the pushing and shoving, Xiao Yuan took a few steps forward. After two ghost soldiers dragged away the bodies on the ground, he was also the first to be imprisoned in a huge cage. Immediately after, a man from the Central Plains walked out from across the street, pulled by an iron chain, with a burly figure and a face full of flesh. At this moment, a ghost tribe person walked up to the iron fence. He first glanced at Xiao Yuan and then said in a very stiff Central Plains language, "Two people, only one can live, otherwise, you both have to die, understand?" After speaking, he ignored Xiao Yuan and began to introduce himself to the onlookers. "This person is a soldier in the Central Plains army who is very brave on the battlefield." He pointed at Xiao Yuan and then at the man, saying, "And this person is a bandit leader who dominates the mountains and kills people like wildfire. Now you can bet. Without a doubt, this is a casino. For the ghost people, it is their existence for entertainment and gambling, but for the captured men from the Central Plains, it is a life and death arena." No one would pity Xiao Yuan and the others. After the ghost tribe explained, the whole scene immediately became chaotic, and many people began to bet, but obviously they were more optimistic about the bandit leader. Because in terms of physique, Xiao Yuan has a uniform physique and is not the kind of burly man. However, that person looks much more robust than him, and he is also a killer. As a soldier, Xiao Yuan, in the eyes of the ghost tribe, is not even a match for the horse bandit leader. At this moment, someone also started talking to the ghost soldier who was escorting Xiao Yuan. He shook his head slightly and said, "Look at that bandit leader, he's so sturdy and looks very fierce. The slaves you brought are probably more or less unlucky." The soldier saw Xiao Yuan's situation on the battlefield and confidently said, "Let's wait and see." As the bet was completed, the onlookers of the ghost tribe began to coax. At this moment, the leader of the horse bandits was also fiercely pushed into the cage, and then the iron gate was locked. In this huge iron cage, only Xiao Yuan and the bandit leader stood opposite each other. Although both of them were wearing iron chains on their hands and feet, there was room for extension between them. However, with each arm movement, the chains would make a clatter. To be honest, he really doesn't want to fight this person to the death, but the current situation clearly doesn't allow him. The bandit leader first gave Xiao Yuan a cold glance, then began to slowly move around him with a ready-to-attack posture. Xiao Yuan followed his movements and kept facing him, but couldn't help but ask, "Have you never thought of escaping from here?" "Escape?" The bandit leader sneered, "That one will die even worse. It's better to kill you and exchange it for a good meal of wine and meat." As he spoke, he also launched a fierce attack and rushed towards Xiao Yuan. At the same time, he swung his fist with one arm and fiercely hit Xiao Yuan's face. His fist was fast and looked sharp, but Xiao Yuan only slightly turned his head and deftly avoided the blow. His fist brushed past his ear, while at the same time, he twisted his body and swiftly turned to the man's side, then hit him with his elbow and hit his neck. A muffled groan came, and the man, under this blow, took a few steps horizontally and fiercely collided with the iron fence. But after shaking his head, he immediately got up and charged fiercely towards Xiao Yuan. To be honest, Xiao Yuan really didn't want to kill him, but in the current situation, and with the ubiquitous ghost soldiers outside, he couldn't help it. Flexibly avoiding the man's blow again, Xiao Yuan raised his arms and tied the iron chain in his hand directly to the neck of the bandit leader from the side, then pulled it hard. The two of them fell to the ground, and he also used an iron chain to tie the neck of the bandit leader from behind, gradually exerting force on his arms. Being restrained, the bandit leader began to struggle fiercely, with wide-open eyes and a flushed face, desperately pulling the iron chain around his neck with both hands. Xiao Yuan's eyes were slightly red, with anger and unwillingness inside. It's not about the purpose of the bandits, but about the current situation. He didn't let go of his hands, still holding onto the bandit's neck, while lifting his head and looking around. And seeing that he had already won, but had not killed himself for half a day, several ghost soldiers outside the cage couldn't help but move forward, obviously with some signs of restlessness. Xiao Yuan knew that if he didn't die, he would also have to die. In order to survive, he had no choice but to let out a roar and then grit his teeth and exert a strong force. The iron chain trembled and clattered, and the bandit leader was strangled to death by the iron chain on the spot under this fierce force. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Slaves. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Slaves. Here, human life seems too insignificant. No one would pity the dead bandit leader, and instead, the onlookers from the ghost tribe above cheered in waves. Watching these ghost people who take pleasure in death, Xiao Yuan's anger and unwillingness grew stronger in his heart, but he had no choice but to silently stand up. And as the battle ended, the ghost soldier who was escorting Xiao Yuan also opened the cage and took him out of here. Surrounded by the strange cries and cheers of the ghost tribe, Xiao Yuan was like a slave, without dignity, freedom, let alone human rights. Moreover, as long as he resists, he will inevitably face the joint efforts of countless ghost soldiers to suppress and kill. Without a well-designed plan, acting rashly is tantamount to seeking his own death. Here, he can only continue to live by engaging in a life-and-death struggle and winning the opponent. After leaving the arena, the soldier was originally planning to lock Xiao Yuan back into the dungeon, but outside the arena, a businessman blocked his way. Subsequently, the two began to converse. The merchant first glanced at Xiao Yuan and then said, "Your slave is very good. I have seen his performance in the arena just now. How about it? Are you interested in selling him to me? I can offer a very high price." The soldier turned to look at Xiao Yuan and then shook his head. The merchant extended 5 fingers and said, "I can give out 5 gold coins." Upon hearing these words, the soldier's eyes suddenly lit up, but soon he said helplessly, "This is the general's spoils of war." "Okay, that's really a pity." The merchant shook his head and looked at Xiao Yuan with a look of extreme regret before continuing on. The two of them spoke ghost language, which Xiao Yuan did not understand. However, from their movements, he could feel that he might have been sold as a slave. His eyes became very cold, but his mind remained unusually calm. After being taken back to the dungeon, Xiao Yuan was still put into that cell. The body of the man who had died from robbing Mantu had also been dragged away. Watching him return safely, the other 2 men who had already woken up couldn't help but widen their eyes. Both of them had a hint of fear in their eyes. After Xiao Yuan was locked in, they instinctively took a few steps back. One of them swallowed saliva and couldn't help but say, You actually came back alive." Obviously, they all know what it takes to be taken out, and the people here, once they leave, rarely come back alive. Xiao Yuan ignored the 2 of them and sat silently against the corner of the wall. This place is cruel, devoid of human nature, and may die at any time. He doesn't know how many more days he can live. But this did not dampen his willpower, nor did it make him have the idea of giving up. Instead, he carefully thought about ways to escape from this town in his mind. Just now he was taken back, and along the way, he was observing various situations in the city. How could he be willing to be a slave to the ghost tribe? But seeing him silent, the 2 prisoners did not dare to speak again, as if they had developed some fear towards Xiao Yuan and began to maintain a certain distance from him. So when it was time for dinner, another Mantu was thrown in. This time, unexpectedly, there was no more fighting, but one of the men picked up the mantu, and then came up to Xiao Yuan. With a shy face, he said, "Brother, you eat first." He has already started calling Xiao Yuan big brother, not only because of previous events, but more importantly, he is afraid that Xiao Yuan will be able to come back alive from the arena. At this point, both of them understood in their hearts that if they really wanted to grab, they might not be opponents either, and it would be better to actively show hospitality. But after seeing the mantu, Xiao Yuan simply broke it in half and handed it to the man. "You can share this half." Ah! The man clearly didn't expect Xiao Yuan to say that. After being stunned for a moment, he couldn't help but swallow his saliva and said, "Big brother, are you serious?" Xiao nodded far away, then ignored it and began to tear the half of mantu into his mouth piece by piece. "This mantu is enough to last." The two couldn't help but glance at each other and then repeatedly said, "Thank you, thank you." Of course, Xiao Yuan is also hungry now. The reason why he is so hungry is that he knows that every meal is just such a mantu. If he keeps grabbing it, he will not give the other two people a chance to survive. If he is extremely hungry, he may not dare to do anything with himself on the surface, but who can guarantee that they will not take advantage of Xiao Yuan's deep sleep? In such an environment, the probability of such a situation occurring is definitely over 80%. Give them a way to survive, and they will only be grateful to themselves. The two of them were undoubtedly grateful for Xiao Yuan's generosity. They took half of the mantu as a treasure and carefully shared it. After the three of them finished eating, Xiao Yuan casually asked, "Haven't you ever thought of escaping from here?" Escape. The two of them were clearly stunned, and one of them shook his head. "Here, to survive, you already need great skills. How can you escape?" Xiao Yuan fell silent again. The next day, two ghost soldiers arrived at the prison gate again. Looking at the three peaceful people in the prison, the soldiers were clearly surprised. After a moment of confusion, one of them immediately shouted in ghost language, "You two, come out." He pointed to the two men from the Central Plains and said that although they couldn't understand, they showed a look of fear and kept moving back. But the soldiers of the ghost clan wouldn't let them go. Seeing them ignore, they immediately opened the cell and forcibly pulled the two out. "No. Please let me go. I don't want to go to that damn place." The two of them started shouting and struggling desperately, but it was of no use. Xiao Yuan could only watch silently, he couldn't do anything at all. The two were taken away, undoubtedly sent to the arena, and this time they went out and never returned. In the prison cell, only Xiao Yuan remained. In this harsh environment, in the following period of time, Xiao Yuan began to be frequently taken to the Colosseum, and his situation became increasingly dangerous. However, as he won consecutive victories, his food also improved, and in the end, he even had food and meat. It seems that Xiao Yuan's consecutive victories have caught the attention of the high-level officials of the Ghost Clan. On this day, a Ghost Clan general finally arrived in the prison. He held an iron chain in his hand, and at the other end of the chain was a young woman from the Central Plains. Xiao Yuan still has an impression of this person. It was the ghost general he met on the battlefield before falling into a coma when he first came to this world. The general, led by the soldiers, stood in front of the prison gate and then looked at Xiao Yuan. He nodded and said, "Well, not bad. When I captured this soldier from the Central Plains, I knew he would be a good slave." As he spoke, he also raised his head slightly towards a ghost soldier and said, "Open the prison door." Upon hearing this, the soldier quickly took out the key. After the prison door opened, the general exerted a strong force in his hand and pulled the woman tied with iron chains behind him, then fiercely pushed into the cell. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Women. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Women. The woman's screams came out, as if she had been greatly frightened. As soon as she was pushed into the cell, she curled up and hid in the corner of the wall. The prison gate was once again locked by the soldiers. At this moment, the leader of the ghost tribe also gave a grim smile and said in a stiff Central Plains dialect. "The Colosseum is perfect for you. As long as you can continue to live, I will give you women and food. This woman, enjoy it well." Obviously, Xiao Yuan's victory at the Colosseum was probably due to earning a lot of money for this general, and after he finished speaking, he directly took the soldiers with him. In the prison cell, only Xiao Yuan and the young woman remained. The woman had clearly been tortured, and her clothes were somewhat disheveled. Although she was disheveled, it was difficult to conceal her beauty, and some of her exposed skin also had clear and visible bloodstains from being beaten. This is a woman from the Central Plains. Judging from her attire, she should have been the daughter of a wealthy family before. You don't have to ask, but she must have been captured as a slave by the ghost tribe after the city was destroyed. The young girl who was caught here can be imagined what kind of nightmare she suffered. Xiao Yuan took a deep breath and then reached forward to help the woman up. As soon as she saw his movements, the woman started shouting, "Don't come over. Don't come over." At this moment, her eyes were filled with fear, already huddled in the corner of the wall, but still desperately pushing backwards. Her reaction caused Xiao Yuan's outstretched hand to pause in mid-air. After a moment of silence, he withdrew and handed the chicken leg he had previously sent to the woman. The woman was already extremely hungry, looking at the chicken legs in front of her. Her appetite made her instinctively swallow saliva, but she didn't dare to reach out to take it. Instead, she hugged her knees with both hands and still looked at Xiao Yuan with fear. "Take it," Xiao Yuanyan said succinctly. The woman still didn't dare to move, curled up there, her eyes revealing thick fear and disbelief. In such a situation, Xiao Yuan understood her psychology and didn't say anything more. Instead, he stuffed the chicken legs directly into her arms, then turned around and ignored her, starting to sit on the ground and sketch. He held a stone and drew a simple map of what he had memorized on the ground, including the route from the prison to the arena, as well as the streets he passed along the way. He was calculating how to escape from this town, but the woman saw that Xiao Yuan was no longer paying attention to her. After a while, she finally had the courage to pick up chicken legs and curl up in the corner to eat. After eating it, the fear seemed to have eased a lot, and I couldn't help but tremble my voice as I weakly said, "Thank you." Xiao Yuan looked back at her and casually said, "Miss, don't worry, I won't hurt you." She had obviously been greatly frightened before, her eyes were already red with tears, and her appearance was very weak. After hearing this, her eyes showed a hint of gratitude. She thought that if she was thrown into this cell, she would be mercilessly tortured like before, but to her surprise, Xiao Yuan did not abuse her and instead gave her chicken legs to eat. Day by day, every 2 days, Xiao Yuan would be dragged by the ghost soldiers to the arena for a life and death battle, and then taken back here. During this period, Xiao Yuan brought heavy profits to the leader of the ghost tribe, and the food was arranged better and better. He would allocate half of each meal to the woman. Gradually, the woman was no longer so afraid and began to have the courage to talk to him. From the conversation, Xiao Yuan learned that this woman was under 20 years old. After the ghost tribe broke the city, they first killed all the old and young, and then used the young men and women in the city as slaves to arrest all the young women for their fun. She was one of the victims who had previously suffered demonic abuse. To put it simply, she was the general who casually rewarded Xiao Yuan. Whether she died or not was irrelevant to the ghost people. This place, even Xiao Yuan felt terrifying, and for a woman, her mentality was even more imaginable. He fell silent about her experience because he couldn't comfort the woman, and he himself was in this situation. On this day, Xiao Yuan was once again taken to the Colosseum. At this moment, there are many more ghost people gathered above than before, and the entire crowd is waving their arms, not knowing what they are cheering for. Before going on stage, the leader of the ghost clan also personally came over and whispered to Xiao Yuan. Your opponent is very fierce this time. As long as you can kill him, I will bring you another woman to enjoy tonight. And there will be fish and meat for every meal in the future. From the excited expression of the generals and the expressions of the audience on site, Xiao Yuan could tell that his opponent was probably extremely difficult to deal with this time. Otherwise, today wouldn't be so lively. You should know that after several days, Xiao Yuan has become a hot topic here, and more people are betting on him to win. However, today, the situation is clearly different. Not long after, he and a man from the Central Plains were pushed into a huge cage. Xiao Yuan looked up at the other person. That is a young man, probably about his age, with a slightly taller figure and a dark face, as if sharpened by a knife. There is still a fierce aura on him. Xiao Yuan knew that he was afraid of encountering a difficult opponent. Instead of launching an attack first, he became more cautious than usual and tentatively took 2 steps around the man. As soon as he moved his steps, the sound of the iron chain clattered suddenly, and the opponent had already punched him. His fist was fast, fierce and domineering, like a strong wind hitting his face. With such speed, Xiao Yuan had no time to dodge and could only instinctively cross his arms. With a loud bang, this punch hit Xiao Yuan's arms and sent him flying backwards, hitting his back hard against the iron railing. The audience above suddenly stood up and let out a strange and excited sound. The scorching pain burned Xiao Yuan's arms. The punch just now made him feel like a small mountain was hitting him. With a loud force, he swung his arms and then rushed towards the man. The two of them fought together, and Xiao Yuan's strength was not as strong as the man's. Therefore, he did not dare to confront him again. Instead, he used his skills and began to fight, attacking the key points with each move. The latter struggled with him without losing out, and this fierce fight was exceptionally fierce. With the passage of time, the wounds on the two of them also increased. The onlookers of the Ghost Clan on the field were even more excited, while the famous general stared at the field without blinking, feeling extremely nervous. He is certainly not worried about Xiao Yuan's life, but about his bet today. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Opportunities. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6 Opportunities. After dozens of rounds of fighting, Xiao Yuan temporarily adopted a defensive stance after the two fought their fists. He is well aware that his own strength is not as great as the other parties. And the opponent's martial arts are fierce and domineering, open and close, but they are relatively clumsy. Intentionally exposing loopholes, giving the opponent an opportunity to take advantage of it, and then winning with one strike. At this thought, his eyes stiffened, and the other party just punched him. Xiao Yuan seemed to be unable to give in, feeling flustered. Upon seeing this, the other party was indeed overjoyed and immediately waved their arms, pretending to use the iron chain in their hands to strangle Xiao Yuan's neck. Xiao Yuan, who was clearly in a disadvantageous position, suddenly lowered his body flexibly and passed through the man's armpit, while turning back with an elbow and striking the man's neck. His whole body is full of killing skills, and with this elbow, he tied a knot firmly, fully unleashing his quick, accurate, and ruthless abilities. A muffled groan came, and the man was thrown sideways by this elbow for several steps. His massive body collided with the iron fence and then fell to the ground with a loud bang. The venue suddenly became boiling, and all the Ghost Tribe people stood up and started screaming in a strange way. Okay. The Ghost Clan general who was looking outside exclaimed excitedly. You know, he made a big bet on Xiao Yuan today. This life and death struggle seemed like a decisive blow in the end, but for Xiao Yuan, it was not easy. His lips had already overflowed with blood. The cage was opened, and the man's body was carried away. Xiao Yuan was also taken to the leader of the Ghost Tribe. In the past few days, he has won consecutive battles and I don't know how much money he has earned for the leader of the Ghost Clan. For him, it is like a money tree. Looking at Xiao Yuan in front of him, the leader nodded repeatedly and kept saying, okay, you really didn't disappoint me. As he spoke, he also waved at the two soldiers and said, "Take him back to the dungeon first." When returning to the dungeon again, seeing blood stains on the corner of Xiao Yuan's mouth, the woman inside couldn't help but step forward and ask, "What's wrong with him?" The ghost soldiers ignored her and placed Xiao Yuan on the ground before turning around and leaving. The woman quickly approached and helped Xiao Yuan, saying with concern, "You're injured." The latter opened his eyes, and after the figures of the two ghost soldiers disappeared into the prison cell, he casually wiped the bloodstain from the corner of his mouth and said, "I'm fine, don't worry." That night, the leader of the ghost tribe came to the dungeon again. Seeing him, Xiao Yuan didn't make much noise, but the woman clearly showed a frightened expression and immediately shrunk to the corner, holding her knees with both hands and nervously looking at the general. Her frightened expression made the leader of the ghost clan grin and then wave at his two subordinates. Two ghost soldiers understood and opened the prison door, ready to go forward and catch the woman. Seeing this, Xiao Yuan couldn't help but stand up and asked calmly, "What are you doing? Don't be nervous." The general chuckled lightly and said in a stiff Central Plains dialect, "You are very good. You have earned me a lot of money, and of course, I will reward you well. In the past few days, you should have played with this woman enough. Don't worry, I will help you exchange for a better one." "I see." After a moment of silence, Xiao Yuan turned his head to look at the woman and then faced the leader of the ghost tribe, saying, "No need, she's very good. I really like her." "Oh." The general smiled and said humbly, "It seems that she suits your taste very well. Since that's the case, then that's all right." As he spoke, he waved his hand to signal his two subordinates to come out and lock the prison door again. "Also, I need 2 dishes for each meal," Xiao Yuan added. "No problem," the general agreed without even thinking. Due to Xiao Yuan's skill, he won a lot of money gambling on the arena. He has nothing to say about such small demands. The general led his subordinates away again, and Xiao Yuan sat back on the ground, pulling away the hay and continuing to sketch as usual. "Thank you. Thank you, young master," the woman whispered, looking at Xiao Yuan with a grateful expression in her eyes. "I'm not a young master," Xiao Yuan too didn't respond. The woman didn't say much on this issue, but leaned forward and couldn't help but ask, "I see what you've been drawing on the ground these days, is it a map?" Upon hearing these words, Xiao Yuan finally turned his head to look at her, but did not answer. The woman fell silent for a moment and then continued, "Our place is called Moon City, and all the street buildings here are in my mind." "What?" Upon hearing these words, Xiao Yuan couldn't help but feel a stir in his heart. In the past few days, every time he was taken to the Colosseum, he knew the environment and soldiers patrolling within this area as well as everything else. However, he had never had the opportunity to learn about other places. Now that he heard the woman say this, he couldn't help but pause and ask, "Are you joking, girl?" "The young master has saved my life and I dare not conceal it," the woman said seriously. "This is my hometown, and my father was even more involved in renovating certain places back then." As she spoke, the woman reached out her hand to Xiao Yuan and whispered, "Young master, can I borrow the stone in your hand for a while?" Xiao Yuan handed it to her. After taking it over, the woman began to sit down next to Xiao Yuan and said, "The route that the young master drew is to leave this dungeon and then reach the center of the market, right? It turns out that the arena is in the center of this city, no wonder it's so lively." After the woman finished speaking, she also began to draw a line down with a stone. "From here, heading south leads to the city gate. If the young woman guesses correctly, the young master should be planning the route. However, at the southern city gate, there must be strict defenses and a large number of ghost soldiers. Coming out from here, the hope is slim. In Shijie City, there is an abandoned temple with a dry well inside that can lead to an underground river." After the woman finished speaking, she also looked at Xiao Yuan. After listening to her words, Xiao Yuan couldn't help but be a bit shocked. He asked excitedly, "Miss, are you serious about what you said? It's true that my father was responsible for building this temple back then, the woman said solemnly. Upon receiving her confirmation, Xiao Yuan squinted his eyes, undoubtedly feeling even greater hope in his heart. As he began to ponder, the woman lowered her head slightly to look at his feet and said with a worried expression, "But young master, you have iron chains on your hands and feet, so I'm afraid you won't be able to move around." Xiao Yuan regained his senses and lowered his voice, saying, "This can be solved at any time, it's not important. You can continue." The woman nodded and then began to sketch on the ground while earnestly explaining everything in the town to Xiao Yuan. Xiao Yuan remembered each one in his mind previously. The reason why he did not act rashly was because he had never set a perfect escape route, but now, with what the woman said, he knows that his opportunity has come. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Anti-Killing. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7 Anti-Killing. After the woman finished speaking, Xiao Yuan's eyes lit up and he couldn't help but ask, "Why did you tell me all this?" Upon hearing these words, the woman raised her head and looked at Xiao Yuandao. "Young master, do you know that before this, I had also been sent to other prisons and given to other Central Plains men? But they, like demons, vented their beastly desires on me and viciously beat me. I thought that this time when I came to the young master's place, I would also encounter the same situation as before, but the young master treated me like a human." As she spoke, tears welled up in her beautiful eyes. Her experience, Xiao Yuan can imagine and better understand her emotions. "I never expected that this woman would know every street in the city like the back of her hand, and her father had even participated in the renovation of buildings back then. This is truly a matter of fate." If Xiao Yuan had also subjected her to inhumane torture like everyone else at that time, then there would have been no such thing as today. After taking a deep breath, he said seriously, "Miss, you can rest assured that if there is any opportunity, I will do my best to take you out of here." The woman wiped her tears and slowly shook her head, saying, "No, I have nothing to love anymore. If possible, young master, please escape this place as soon as possible. Don't worry about me, I will only become your burden." "Don't give up," Xiao Yuan said sternly. Upon hearing these words, the woman couldn't help but be moved in her heart, but she shook her head again and said seriously, "Young master, promise me to escape from here and don't worry about me." Looking at her serious gaze, Xiao Yuan didn't say anything more. The next morning, in the dungeon, Xiao Yuan was discussing matters with the woman, and the two of them had drawn many simple routes on the ground. "Do you mean to forcefully cut out a path of bloodshed from what the young master said?" "Well." Xiao Yuan pondered for a moment and said, "As the girl said, there is still some distance from here to that temple. If..." At this point, he suddenly fell silent and then whispered, "Shoo, someone is coming." Sure enough, as soon as he finished speaking, there were clear footsteps coming. Then, two ghost soldiers came to Xiao Yuan's cell. As usual, after the soldiers stood still, they immediately started shouting at Xiao Yuan, preparing to take him to the arena. The door to the prison cell was opened, and Xiao Yuan stood up silently. From the previous conversation, the woman already knew that Xiao Yuan was ready to take action, so she couldn't help but say, "Young master." Recognizing the concern in her tone, Xiao Yuan turned his head to look at her, indicating her peace of mind. Then, he was dragged out of the prison by the ghost soldiers. "Hurry up." There was another round of pushing and shoving, with Xiao Yuan wearing iron chains in front and two ghost soldiers behind, starting to escort him towards the entrance of the dungeon. In fact, at this point, he could have killed these two soldiers, but if so, the gatekeeper would have locked the entire dungeon gate in the first place, and all previous efforts would have been in vain. Therefore, he was not in a hurry, but walked forward calmly as usual. There are dozens of cells in this dungeon. As Xiao Yuan walked past each cell, many prisoners inside also stood by the cell door and watched. This situation occurs every day. Every day, people are taken to the Colosseum, prisoners are stuck at the cell door watching, and every day, people go out and never come back. Before long, Xiao Yuan had already been taken by 2 soldiers to the gate of the dungeon. At the entrance, there are 4 guards holding spears, separated on both sides. When he arrived here, Xiao Yuan immediately stopped his steps. The soldiers behind him saw this and without saying a word, directly reached out and pushed him, while shouting, "Hurry up." If it were normal, Xiao Yuan would definitely be pushed forward unsteadily, but now, his body not only remained motionless, but also turned around suddenly. With the sound of the iron chain, he swung a punch directly at one of the soldiers and smashed it hard. A scream sounded, and this punch hit the soldier's face, causing him to spray blood from his mouth and nose and fall to the ground. Another soldier was shocked when he saw this, but before he could react, Xiao Yuan had already pushed himself forward and hit his neck with a lightning-fast punch. The crisp sound of bones shattering sounded, and the second soldier didn't even scream before flying out sideways. In such a sudden change, the 4 guards at the door immediately reacted after being stunned, and then let out a strange cry. With spears in their hands, they fiercely charged toward Xiao Yuan. The space at the entrance of the dungeon was limited, with 4 spears piercing at the same time. Xiao Yuan had no choice but to temporarily withdraw and retreat. But as soon as he left, one of the guards immediately grabbed the prison door with his hand and pretended to close it. The reason why Xiao Yuan chose to take action here was because he was afraid that the dungeon would be locked up, so he refused to let him succeed. Without saying a word, he punched him directly. The guard's fingers holding the wooden railing were punched straight, and a mournful howl sounded. He suddenly felt as if he had been bitten by a snake, and lightning withdrew his arm. At the same time, Xiao Yuan also moved, his body like a fierce tiger, pouncing upwards. There are 4 opponents, how could it be his opponent? Although he has a spear in his hand, his reaction and speed cannot be compared to Xiao Yuan. His throat, heart, every blow he makes is a deadly move. It's a long story, but in fact, the entire process was only in a moment. After quickly resolving a few people, Xiao Yuan knew that a large number of soldiers from the ghost tribe would soon besiege here, leaving him with little time left. He immediately took out a string of keys from a dead soldier, first untied the iron chains on his hands and feet, and then rushed back to the dungeon, starting to open all the cells. He opened one room and hurried towards the next without any pause. As the prison door opened and all the dungeon guards were killed, there was no doubt that a group of prisoners in the prison began to flock out. "Run! Run!" Many people started shouting, and the desire to survive drove everyone crazy. The scene was extremely chaotic for a moment. In the midst of chaos, Xiao Yuan finally squeezed into his own cell, quickly opened the cell door, untied the iron chains of the woman's hands and feet, and pulled her up before leaving. "Young master." But at this moment, the woman paused under her feet, looking anxious. She was anxious, and Xiao Yuan was even more anxious. He couldn't help but strengthen his hand and said, "Now is not the time to talk nonsense. Let's go. Young master, I have been defiled by those beasts and am no longer innocent. It's better to live than to die. Why do you take the risk of meddling in me?" the woman continued. Either way, sometimes, women really get things wrong. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Chaos. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Chaos. At that time, women valued chastity, and her body had been devastated. Even if she could escape, she might have lost the courage to live. But in the current situation, there is no time to say so much. Xiao Yuan couldn't help but feel anxious and said, "Being alive is more important than anything else. But I'll marry you." Before the woman could finish speaking, Xiao Yuan shouted loudly and took her hand as he ran wildly towards the outside. And this sentence first made the woman lose her voice, and then her nose became sore and her eyes turned red. She let Xiao Yuan pull her and run quickly, tears couldn't help but pounce down her face. The entire dungeon is still very chaotic now, because many prisoners are running towards the outside, and many of them have already gone crazy. Therefore, a few men saw a woman and wanted to step forward with a chuckle. Get lost. Without saying a word, Xiao Yuan kicked those crazy people out one by one. He grabbed the woman's hand and quickly ran out of the dungeon. When he arrived outside, the scene became even more chaotic within his gaze. Due to the sudden appearance of the sun, the prisoners had already begun to flee wildly, and at this moment, a large number of ghost soldiers had already arrived at the scene and began to engage in a chaotic battle with the prisoners. There were screams everywhere, blood splattered everywhere, many prisoners were stabbed to the ground with long spears, and some people worked together to subdue the ghost soldiers. Xiao Yuan glanced around and then picked up the woman before leaving. Of course, it was inevitable that soldiers from the ghost tribe would stop him on the way, but he easily grabbed a spear. But without a doubt, he was soon blocked by a large number of soldiers on his way. Kill. Without any nonsense, Xiao Yuan held a spear and directly welcomed 4 or 5 soldiers. The soldiers let out a strange cry together, wielding 4 or 5 curved swords and facing Xiao Yuan head-on. Due to the wooden shaft of the spear, Xiao Yuan did not dare to forcefully connect it. Instead, he used his agility to dodge sideways. 5 curved swords fell into the air, and before the opponent could recover, Xiao Yuan fiercely stabbed a spear and then, without diminishing his momentum, pierced through the bodies of the 2 soldiers from the side. As the fighting continued, more and more ghost soldiers gathered here. Finally, in order to protect the woman behind him, Xiao Yuan was also shot on the shoulder with a spear. A muffled groan came, and the woman saw the situation and immediately burst into tears, anxiously saying, "Young master, hurry up and leave. Don't worry about me, otherwise I will only become your burden. Don't talk nonsense. Follow me and fight a bloody path together." Xiao Yuan shouted coldly. If this woman had not pointed out the route, Xiao Yuan probably wouldn't have had any chance of escaping, so no matter what, he had an obligation to take this woman away. Looking at Xiao Yuan, who was protecting herself behind her and fighting against so many ghost soldiers, the woman's face showed an anxious and worried expression, but she couldn't help anything. In the arena, the fierce fighting continued, and the bodies of ghost soldiers had already fallen one by one on the ground. At this moment, a spear stabbed diagonally in, and the woman immediately exclaimed in surprise, "Young master, be careful." At the same time, she also pounced fiercely at Xiao Yuan, who was knocked to the ground by her. However, the spear pierced through the woman's body directly, entering her chest from the front, with the tip of the spear sticking out from behind and dripping with blood. Miss. Xiao Yuan suddenly widened his eyes, roared angrily, and immediately stood up, using a spear as a stick, sweeping horizontally towards the soldier's neck. A scream sounded, and the ghost soldier was directly hit in the head by this spear. His body flew out horizontally and fell heavily into the distance. Girl. Until then, Xiao Yuan still didn't know her name. Looking at Xiao Yuan holding her, the woman's mouth was bleeding with blood. Meeting a young master in a situation where there is nothing to love is a blessing that I have earned from my previous life. After saying these words, she also began to push Xiao Yuan away with both hands and said, "Let's go, young master, let's go." Mississippi. Xiao Yuan's eyes also turned a little red. Hurry up. If you don't leave, there won't be enough time. Just as Xiao Yuan was still trying to pick her up, the woman used her last bit of strength and grabbed Xiao Yuan's wrist, tilted her head, and bit him hard. Under the pain of eating, Xiao Yuan instinctively withdrew his hand, and the woman vigorously pushed him away, saying, "Let's go." She shouted loudly, almost begging, and Xiao Yuan's eyes turned even redder. "Let's go, young master. Please, hurry up." The woman shed tears. With a roar, Xiao Yuanmeng stood up. That spear has already taken the woman's life. Her life is passing and cannot be saved. With her, everyone will die here. Xiao Yuan knew that the current situation was not a time for indecisiveness. At this moment, the killing intent in his eyes also grew stronger. There was another bloody battle, with corpses falling at his feet. He finally rushed onto the street, causing chaos on the street. The pursuers behind him were approaching, and Xiao Yuan didn't hesitate. He immediately spotted a house, without hesitation. He kicked open the door with his legs up and rushed in. Inside the house, there was an ordinary resident of the ghost tribe. When he saw the intruder, the person first let out a strange cry, then began to chatter and say something. Xiao Yuan didn't even wait for him to finish speaking, so he picked up his spear and mercilessly stabbed it. After killing the ghost people, he quickly closed the door, took off his blood-stained clothes, stripped off the ghost people's clothes, put them on himself, and then climbed over the wall and emerged. On the street, teams of ghost soldiers holding spears can be seen everywhere, running quickly towards the direction of the dungeon. Xiao Yuan is dressed in ghost clothes, wearing a foreign cloth scarf on his head, bowing his head, and walking quickly. At this moment, a group of soldiers happened to pass by. One of them saw Xiao Yuan and immediately shouted, "The dungeon is in chaos. Slaves have already escaped. What are you doing outside? Don't worry, hurry back to your own home." Xiao Yuan couldn't understand what he was saying, and due to his different appearance, he didn't dare to look up at all. Instead, he quickened his pace and walked forward. Fortunately, the soldiers did not suspect and immediately left after shouting. Next, Xiao Yuan began to follow the route pointed out by the woman before and walked quickly towards the West Street. After crossing several streets with his head down, Xiao Yuan finally saw the temple that the woman had mentioned, despite a thrilling journey. Due to abandonment, this place is completely deserted and located in a remote area. The temple gate is half open and there are some spider webs on it. After scanning from side to side, Xiao Yuan didn't hesitate. He carefully let go of the spider web with his cat on his waist and jumped in. As we searched towards the backyard, we indeed discovered a dry well. That woman didn't lie to him. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Escape from Shengtian. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Escape from Shengtian. Standing on top and looking down, this dry well was pitch black. Xiao Yuan didn't know how deep it was. After searching nearby, he also picked up a stone and threw it down. Fortunately, the sound was very close, and he no longer hesitated. He immediately propped his hands on the edge of the well and jumped down. A muffled sound came, and Xiao Yuan quickly fell to the bottom of the well. After calming down for a moment, he also slowly stood up. It was pitch black all around, but he didn't panic, but felt it quietly. A faint airflow came from his left side, and with a movement in his heart, he immediately blackened out and walked towards the left. In the darkness, he walked along the wall, groping his way forward, and so on. After walking for a long time, he had no idea and had already lost his sense of direction. He just felt like this was a passage. He didn't walk very fast, but he also took a slight rest halfway through. Gradually, there seemed to be a slight sound of water flowing under his feet. Then, the sound grew louder and clearer. Evolving to the end, it has become a thunderous sound, and in front of it, it suddenly becomes clear. Originally, this was a waterfall, where Xiao Yuan was located, right behind the middle section of the waterfall. Without crossing the waterfall, it would be difficult to find this place outside. Under the waterfall, there is a huge pool surrounded by dense forests. Did you finally come out? Xiao Yuan couldn't help but show an excited expression. Looking at the pool below, he jumped down without saying a word. With a splash, water splashed everywhere, and Xiao Yuan plunged into it with a fierce thrust, but soon his head popped out. During his time in prison, he was seen as a slave all day, imprisoned in the dungeon without seeing the sun. It had been a long time since he took a shower, and his body was dirty and smelly. Now that he was in clear water, he couldn't help but feel comfortable. The feeling of escaping from heaven is like returning from hell to the human world. Unfortunately, I was unable to bring out that young woman. After throwing away the coat of the ghost people, Xiao Yuan also discovered the military badge on his waist. Unexpectedly, the military card had not been lost yet. He instinctively picked it up and flipped through it, then began to ponder. All the families in this world have died in the war. At present, he has two paths to take. The first is to stay away from here and find a place to survive in this world. But based on what he had already learned, he had a clear understanding that this world did not belong to any era in history, but it was plagued by war and chaos, with ordinary people struggling to make a living. Their lives were like ants, and if they lived in a place to survive, they would probably die sooner or later from war and chaos. Secondly, it is to kill back to the Moon City and take this opportunity to make achievements. Now, he knows this secret passage, and his identity is also that of a soldier in the Central Plains Army, and he has a clear understanding of where his main camp is stationed. Obviously, this is an opportunity. An opportunity to determine his future direction in this world. His choice will also directly determine what he will look like in the future. After calming down, he immediately made a decision, then collected his military card and plunged down with another fierce thrust. After a thorough cleaning, Xiao Yuan returned to the shore and then identified the direction based on the sun, heading west. And every distance he walked, he also began to break some branches and make simple marks on the ground. This dense forest was a bit big, and it wasn't until the sun was slightly west that Xiao Yuan walked out of here and continued westward the next morning, under the city of Lucheng. At this time, Lucheng was under full martial law and was on guard against the invasion of the ghost tribe. Not only were rows of long halberd soldiers standing at the city gates, but the gates were also tightly closed, with no one passing by. Before Xiao Yuan could approach, arrows had already been shot at the city and fiercely nailed to the ground in front of him. At the same time, some people in the city shouted loudly, "Stop here. Don't shoot arrows. I am an infantry soldier under General Chen Da's command." Xiao Yuan immediately shouted. Chen Da, as he spoke, was the main general of the previous battle in the plain. However, upon hearing this, the people in the city fell silent for a moment, then waved to the two soldiers and said, "Go down and take a look." "Yes." The soldier responded, then lowered the rope and descended from the city gate. From the situation of Lucheng's city defense, it can also be seen how cautious the Central Plains Army is now, or in other words, it has been feared by the ghost tribe. After the two soldiers came down, they also walked up to Xiao Yuan. One of them looked up and down at Xiao Yuan and then said, "General Chen Da's troops have been completely destroyed, haven't they?" "That's right, our troops encountered the main force of the ghost army on the plain, with almost all soldiers killed in battle. I was also captured by the ghost tribe and it took more than 20 days to escape," Xiao Yuan said truthfully. As he spoke, he also reached into his arms, took out the military badge he had been carrying with him, and handed it to the soldier. The soldier took it and carefully flipped through it in his hand. At this moment, Xiao Yuan's military badge played a role, and he was from the Central Plains. Therefore, the soldier nodded and said, "So it's his own brother." As he spoke, while returning the general's card to Xiao Yuan, he also shouted loudly towards the city, "My own people." Upon hearing his shout, someone in the city immediately waved their hand. With the person's gesture, soon the tall city gate also made a sour, squeak sound, and Xiao Yuan was also brought into the city. In Lucheng, there is a conference hall. The commander-in-chief of the Central Plains Army's resistance against the ghosts, named LV Bolin, is currently gathering in the conference hall and standing on both sides. LV Bolin is pacing back and forth from the position directly above. He was dressed in general armor and draped in a cloak at the back. After taking 2 more steps, he also stopped and said with some concern, 20 days ago, Chen Da encountered the main force of the Ghost Clan, almost completely annihilating his army. Now, after the Ghost Clan occupied the Moon City, the next target should be Lucheng. Report. As he was speaking, a scout hurriedly rushed in and then knelt down on one knee, clasping his fists and saying, "General LV, under General Chen Da's command, there is a soldier who has escaped from the Moon City. He claims to have something important and requests to see General LV." What? Upon hearing these words, LV Bolin couldn't help but feel a shock in his mind. If anyone can escape from the Moon City, then they must have some knowledge of the situation inside the Moon City. This is equivalent to military intelligence, and when he thought of it, he immediately said, "Quickly, bring him over." No. The scout bowed and retreated. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Give me 500 horses. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Give me 500 horses. Before long, Xiao Yuan was led into the hall. In that era, there were distinctions in hierarchy and hierarchy. Therefore, after entering the hall, he also knelt down on one knee and clasped his fist at LV Bolin, saying, "I have seen General LV." This is military etiquette, and LV Bolin also waved his hand and said, "You don't need to be too polite." As he spoke, when Xiao Yuan stood up, he also looked up at him. At present, although Xiao Yuan was dressed in coarse clothes, he had already undergone simple grooming in the water pool and tied his hair with cloth strips. His appearance was definitely very handsome, and he was as handsome as a star. After surveying, LV Bolin nodded secretly and also asked, "I heard from the sergeant that you are an infantry soldier under General Chen Da's command." "Yes," Xiao Yuan replied. As the commander-in-chief of the First Army, LV Bolin obviously wouldn't easily trust Xiao Yuan like the city gate guards. Next, he asked Xiao Yuan some questions, such as his hometown, when he joined the army, and which group of infantry belonged to Chen Da's command. Xiao Yuan understood all of these, so he answered fluently. After confirming these things, LV Bolin also believed what Xiao Yuan said and began to get to the point, saying, "Let's talk about the situation in Moon City." Xiao Yuan said truthfully, after the Ghost Clan captured the Moon City, they first killed all the old and young in the city, then arrested the young girls. The middle-aged men became slaves and were taken to the Colosseum all day long, killing each other for pleasure. The women were prostitutes and allowed to commit adultery. Upon hearing this, LV Bolin couldn't help but clench his fist, and the other generals in the hall also began to show signs of anger. Some couldn't help but curse, "Damn it. The Ghost Clan is so ungrateful. These animals." People were cursing, while LV Bolin raised his hand to stop the crowd and then asked Xiao Yuan, "Since you can escape from the hands of the Ghost Tribe, you must have some understanding of the defense of the Ghost Army in the Moon City." After thinking for a moment, Xiao Yuan said sternly, "I am seen as a slave, and my territory is only within the range of the Colosseum. As for the defense of the Moon City Pass, I don't know how their troops are stationed." Upon hearing these words, LV Bolin couldn't help but frown. He thought he could learn any useful information, but now it seems that he is clearly disappointed. However, before he could speak, Xiao Yuan said in a trembling voice, "But LV Shuai, if you can give me 500 men and horses, I can definitely help you capture the Moon City." His words were resolute, but the generals in the hall were noticeably stunned upon hearing them, and many couldn't help but chuckle. 500 people captured the Moon City. Is he joking? Lu Bolin shook his head and looked at Xiao Yuan with a funny expression, saying, "Do you know that according to our army's report, there are 30,000 ghost troops in the Moon City? With only 500 people, how can we capture the Moon City? It's not just a dream." "Hee, this kid really doesn't know the vastness of heaven and earth," said another general. There were also people who said, "Lu Shuai, I believe this kid must have been imprisoned by the Ghost Army and fooled. We don't need to pay attention." Obviously, people thought Xiao Yuan was joking. Xiao Yuan ignored the ridicule from the crowd and continued, "If I can leave the Moon City, I can enter. How dare I joke with General LV about this kind of thing?" Oh. This sentence caught Lu Bolin's interest, and he couldn't help but stare at Xiao Yuan. "What are your plans?" Xiao Yuan Dao said, Lu Shuai, can I borrow some pen and ink? After thinking for a moment, LV Bolin turned his body and reached out to the handsome desk, saying, please. Lu Shuai, it's just a small infantry soldier. At this moment, some of the generals began to shout, obviously puzzled. Ah. However, LV Bolin waved his hand and said, let's see if he has any lofty opinions. At this moment, Xiao Yuan had already walked to the handsome desk, picked up LV Bolin's brush, and then spread open a piece of silk cloth. Seeing him act like this, LV Bolin and a group of generals couldn't help but approach. Xiao Yuan first glanced at everyone, then picked up his brush and drew several crisscrossing routes on the silk book, saying, this is the general route of Yueqing Street. What he drew was all told to him by the woman in prison. After speaking, he continued, although I don't know the deployment of the ghost army in the Moon City, the city gate is here. He drew a circle on the picture and continued, and I, along with 500 soldiers, can sneak into the Moon City. Unconsciously, I will appear here and kill the city gate guards with lightning speed, then open the city gate and light a fire as a signal. At that time, when Lu Shuai saw that the city gate was on fire, he led a large army to attack the Moon City without any obstruction. He rushed into the city without any obstruction. I wonder if he can capture the Moon City, said Xiao Yuan. Hiss. After listening to his explanation, LV Bolin couldn't help but take a light breath and asked in a condensed voice, what do you mean, can you open the city gate from inside the city? That's right. Xiao Yuan replied. In this way, our army can launch a night attack on the Moon City, catching the ghost fighting army off guard, said LV Bolin. That's exactly what I mean, Xiao Yuan said directly. Well. LV Bolin pondered for a moment, only considering it for a moment, and then clenched his fist and said in a trembling voice, okay. I'll give you 500 horses. Lu Shuai, this. There is something more that a biased general wants to say. What I need is 500 elite soldiers, said Xiao Yuan once again, okay. LV Bolin also made a decisive decision. As the commander of the army, he had no reason not to agree, and immediately ordered, listen. Choose 500 elite soldiers from the army and return. As he spoke, he paused and asked Xiao Yuan, what's your name? Subordinate Xiao Yuan. Okay, these 500 elite soldiers, return to Xiao Yuan for dispatch. LV Bolin issued the order. Get the order. Xiao Yuan also shook his body and responded with a clasped fist. The generals in the hall, it's you looking at me, I look at you, with a big-eyed and small-eyed appearance. End of this chapter.